The battle became one of rival scientists as much as ships and submarines. Improvements in detection, destruction, and air cover devastated the U-boats. Of the 39,000 officers and men who put out to sea, almost 30,000 never returned.
Boys, keep it quiet. Nice and quiet now.
The depth charge experience is something you have to feel to go through it. Imagine yourself in a big tin tank and some character hammering on it with a huge sledgehammer on the outside. First place, it shocks your eardrums. Second place, the whole thing is shivering like this. And third, you're scared because you're afraid that maybe the sea pressure will break through, and if water comes in, you've had it.
Depth charges robbed Germany of her ace commanders. Kretschmer counts himself lucky to have escaped with his life.
And remember, the boat stood on the stern, vertically on the stern. I was the last one on the bridge, and went down stern first, vertically.
Was one of 784 U-boats sunk at sea. For those men who sank with their submarines, the experience was uniquely terrifying.
I was in the wardroom, as it were, over there at the time, decoding a signal, and there's suddenly this enormous bang forward.
Commander Teddy Young was one of the survivors of a collision with a ship. His submarine sank in 80 feet of water. He became separated from the others in the darkness.
When I turned round, I suddenly was in the control room, and there was nobody there. All the crew had gone into the engine room, and they'd shut their door and started doing their escape. So yeah, I thought I was all alone. And then I suddenly heard a voice over my head. And I looked up into the conning tower. They said, "Hello, Teddy, what are you doing down there?" So I said, "In a room up there for me." And they said, "Well, we might just squeeze you in." So I went up. First lieutenant said, "Here we go for survivor's leave." Pushed up the hatch, and the sea came tumbling in, and we just fought our way out. I think half the officers and half the men were lost altogether. And this includes 2 who were lost on the bridge, who drowned because they couldn't swim. In fact, the navigating officer who was with the captain, he had heavy sea boots on. And he swam for a bit, and then the boots were too heavy, and he just sank underwater.
That's Barbell, Sunfight, aerial bound, all hands lost.
The submarine was arguably the deciding factor in every maritime theater of war. Far from the battle for the Atlantic, America's submariners took pride in placing themselves in harm's way.
I'm speaking, of course, to a very distinctive group of those men, an exclusive community of heroes who endured, who thrived on extraordinary dangers and privations, who sought out a life at the very edge of human endurance and ability. They were the men all of them volunteers who took on both the sea and the enemy in America's submarines during World War II. The story of the submarine in the Pacific is one without any parallel. It began here, of course, on a Sunday morning 50 years ago.
We have witnessed this morning a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese. It is no joke, it is a real war.
For all the terrible devastation wreaked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese did not get at what arguably became the crucial type of vessel in the Pacific. They did not strike at the submarines.
The Japanese failed to grasp the tactical purpose of the submarine. They wasted them as transport and supply vessels, carrying munitions, seaplanes, and midget submarines. Even with the advantage of surprise, none of the midgets launched at Pearl Harbor was to survive the day. The job of a submarine is to attack. The Germans knew this, as did the Americans, but at the outset, they had problems.
Immediately after Pearl Harbor, the Pacific submarine crews do not appear to have been very well trained, and above all, they suffered from a faulty torpedo. And they were lucky, I think, that the Japanese anti-submarine effort was so weak that it gave them a chance not only to re-equip with new weapons, but to develop better tactical doctrines, train up a new generation of submarine crews and COs who could use the new submarines much more effectively.
The new submarines crisscrossed the Pacific, undeterred either by Japanese anti-submarine measures or the daily propaganda broadcasts of Tokyo Rose.
American submarines have headed west from Pearl Harbor. If American submariners are wise, you will turn back. Certain death awaits you over here. And now I'll play for you unfortunate Americans a popular recording.
Like Britain, Japan was an island nation, dependent on imports. Her supply lines were vulnerable, and the Americans went straight for the jugular.
Beginning at the war, it was pretty exhilarating, but it got to be old stuff about the 8th or 9th patrol. We were just at submerged periscope depth, and they were coming at us, and our captain fired the stern tubes at him. Right, they called that down the throat shot. And we blew him out of the water. It was either him or us, one or the other.
The Japanese submarine force regarded attacks on merchant shipping as secondary, preferring naval targets, or worse, using their submarines in defense. Submarines remain Japan's single biggest failure. Even the I-class, the largest in the world. The Japanese specialty, the midget, was also unsuccessful, though it was to symbolize the terror of Japan's threat to the whole Pacific. The two-man midgets brought the war into suburban backyards of Sydney, destroying the innocent belief that with distance went security.
I was very shocked, but we're still here.
We're going to live here, too.
But an even smaller weapon of terror was to come. Born of the desperation of looming defeat, a suicide midget was devised, a torpedo driven by a man. They called them Kai-10s. It meant the turn towards heaven, everlasting glory for the doomed pilots.
These Kai-10s had no fire control equipment, but all they did was aim at the bow of a ship that's moving forward, go at full speed themselves until everything went blank. That was the tactic.